So we're beginning chapter 7, section 2, and we're talking about the power of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a big problem in our government, and day by day it's getting worse and worse. We'll find out exactly what bureaucracy is. We kind of have in the last section, but it's very important to know how the government through bureaucracy the federal government is getting so much control over the American citizen. So we'll find out about that. So bureaucracy in the Constitution. So in the original design of the Constitution by our forefathers, Congress has erected a multitude of new offices to regulate Americans. In the Constitution, there is no direct mention of bureaucracy at all. In Article 2, Section 2, which we're talking about, makes mention of the government officials as principal officers and executive departments and secretaries. That is mentioned. But the Constitution empowers the president to compel the heads of these states to give them their opinions about duties, not taking over these duties, the opinions that are related to these duties, these things. So Constitution mentions the power of the president to appoint ambassadors and other public ministers, and also to appoint counsels and judges of the Supreme Court, which is very important, and other officers of the United States. So the Constitution does mention that. But what about this bureaucracy? All such appointments must be approved by the Senate. So the Senate is actually the Congress, which has power over their finances, giving financings, appropriations of finance to these offices, and also to hear and try impeachments of these appointed officials, and also to shape laws that will enforce. So we have the balance of powers through the Congress. We see that, and later on we'll see through the Supreme Court also. But what about this bureaucracy? What about under the president, we have all these regulatory agencies that have been formed that we can't hardly get rid of. So let's talk about the bureaucracies and the separation of powers. The founders' views. The founders considered the concentration of powers to be very dangerous to liberty. That's why the founding fathers gave us 3 branches of government: the legislative, where the laws are made; the judicial, where the laws are interpreted; and on to the executive, where the laws are carried out. And these branches have to balance each other, right? So that one branch doesn't get too much power. And so they had experienced abusive power in the past in the British Crown, so they knew. So through the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson had erected, Thomas Jefferson had seen that the British government had erected a lot of new offices for different things of the government, different established arbitrary government, let's just say that. So basically he saw this problem was starting to be a problem in the British Crown, bureaucracy. Under James Madison, I love what James Madison said here, and I highlighted it here. He said, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial powers in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. So what was he saying? He was saying the definition of tyranny, where a tyrannical power takes over the government, like we have in communist nations and stuff. He said, when you concentrate powers, when that person or that government, whether it just be a few people or many people, has all the accumulation of powers, has all the powers to make laws, to to make sure laws are carried out and to interpret laws. If you have all the powers in the same hand, you're going to have a tyranny. So you're going to have a problem. You're going to have a dictator. So it's so important that we have the balance of powers. That's what our government was founded on, is our balancing those powers, because we know that the heart of man is deceitfully wicked beyond measure, right? If you get too many powers in one hand. Here we have a basic history. During the late 19th century, that's in the late 1800s, and the early 20th century, early 1900s, we see progressive leaders began offering a vision of American government that was contrary to what the framers had established. Instead of a government of separate powers, they wanted a government system that operated outside the Constitution system of separate powers, something that was beyond these checks and balances. So progressives, and we have progressives, we think of President Roosevelt, of course, FDR, but also Woodrow Wilson. They actually thought, oh, we've gone beyond that. We really don't need so many of these checks and balances. We just need to hire, executors of this, or we just need to hire those for this bureaucracy to carry things out. Thinking that, we were beyond having problems, we were beyond tyranny. That's pretty much of a joke, don't you think? So, because many progressives believe that history had progressed beyond the need to be fearful of government abuses. Like, we really don't need to be afraid of our government. Wow. Don't we need to be afraid of what our government's doing now? It could come and take our property, take our children, a lot of different things the government would want to do. And so the progressives had an idea that man was basically good, and we know that mankind is not. We see that in the Bible. So basically going on, the concentration of power will likely lead few or many to the kinds of abuses that the founding fathers protested. So, and in making these independent regulatory commissions and other regulatory agencies, they concentrated the power. Now this bureaucracy now is taking over even what the president or Congress ever thought that would happen. So these agencies now, this bureaucracy now, by exercising powers that not only executive, but now they think they have executive powers to carry things out. They're regulating things, but they also have legislative. They can make their own rules, and they also have judicial. They can actually, carry out and interpret their own rules and have their own judges to look to make sure the rules are carried out the way they think. It's almost their little governments going on. So what they came to be, but basically putting together these independent regulatory agencies, putting together what was called the ALGs or ALJs, administrative law judges. So let's go back there. Independent regulatory commissions. Let's talk a little bit more about what we're talking about right here. So first of all, it concentrates the power now, because they not only are part of the executive department, but they have their own legislative ideas, making their own laws. They don't really care what Congress says a lot of times. And they also have their own judicial power in interpreting these laws and carrying them out. So basically they issue their own rules, and they penalize those who do not abide by their rules. They employ these administration law judges, which are called ALJs. Hey, nobody really knows about them. I didn't even know about them until I was reading them here. ALJs are the specific group of judges of their own. It's not from the Supreme Court, not government judges, or not those that are under our law as the United States. They're under these corporations or these regulatory, agencies. And so they have a special group of judges who preside over informal, little publicized cases arising out of the agency decisions called the hidden jurisdictions or hidden judiciary. hidden judges. So these are little hidden judges that these agencies have. Hey, the Constitution never promoted this type of stuff. So the ALGs first, tried cases. They try their own cases and have their own judges to try these cases. So they also hear appeals, and the only appeals that they want to hear. And, they're brought by people or firms. And many of these cases cannot even be appealed in their case. So the problem here is right here. There's a concentration of governmental power within the federal bureaucracy that our founders never intended at all. And so, because they purposely separated those government powers so that this wouldn't happen. So if they could even see it now, they'd be like aghast, wouldn't they? Oh my goodness. They purposely separated these to prevent the concentration of powers, which now the agency. And today these agencies have unparalleled power. They can adversely affect individuals and groups, and often they're referred to as the fourth branch of the government. So the fourth branch of the government. So we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch and the judicial branch, and we're talking about those branches, but now we have this big bureaucracy under the executive branch that was supposed to help the president, now taking over from what the president, from that point, and also even from what Congress thought. So the framers thought that good government, they basically said, based when the United States and the Constitution, they thought that good government was restraints on political power. So a tyrant can't get a hold of our country and control our country. And so they were not looking into the creation of numerous agencies with open-ended guidelines to control us. So this is really out of step with the intentions of the founding fathers. So going on to the legacy of expanding this bureaucracy. So basically saying here, a government big enough, actually President Gerald Ford said this, a government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take from you everything you have. So if you want a government to give you everything you want, and they have that power, they can take it away in a minute and take away everything you have. We're talking about communism. We're talking about socialism. We're talking about a tyrant. We're talking about dictators in this case. So balancing this whole government has a problem when it comes to these ballooning bureaucracies that are getting so big to control. So we just saw in the last section how big they're getting, so humongous. And so going on, a ballooning bureaucracy shakes the foundation of American liberty and can control the lives of Americans. And so we know that. So political and economic and religious freedom would be at stake when you have a bureaucracy controlling you, right? So, and especially when you think of our free enterprise system with our economy, it especially puts big controls on business, big controls on American business, especially small businesses. Small businesses are having a terrible time standing when they have so many rules and regulations, and to that point have to pay so many penalties and taxes or not regulated fees on things, So we're going to go over this. This is a terrible thing, a danger of almighty bureaucracy. I'm going to go over that in a minute, but let's finish up here first. So saying again, our free enterprise system is at stake when we have regulations on our businesses for nearly everything. In 1982, a journalist reported 310 regulations for the ingredients manufactured for a pizza. So the pizza place said, oh my goodness, we have 310 regulations on making our pizza. So the problems here come, among these problems, the concentration of political power and this growth have created these problems. And among these problems are threefold. These problems are prolonged usefulness, well, actually four of them, prolonged usefulness, inefficiency, deficit spending, and threats to our freedom. So let's go over these 4 things that are so very important. And then I want to go over the story and it'll make you really feel aghast of what's happening. So we want a president who does not want a strong bureaucracy, and basically a president who wants to get rid of our huge bureaucracy that's growing each and every day. So let's go to the problems. Prolonged usefulness. Prolonged usefulness, when you think of that, is basically it's easy to create a bureaucratic position. It's easy to create an agency, right? But guess what? It's almost impossible to eliminate it. So even when the agency doesn't have any purpose anymore, it's hard to get rid of it. Why? Because the bureaucrats create work for those that work for them, and their jobs are never finished, and they also have more rules to make and more rules to see that are carried out. They're never eliminated. An example here would be the ICC, and it'd be a good example. ICC is the Interstate Commerce Commission. This was created, a long time ago. In fact, when you think of it, it was created to control or help control the railroad system. But the trucking industry, then it was deregulated in 1980, and the ICC, now the Interstate Commerce, had nothing to regulate anymore. So in 1995, in 1980, it had nothing to regulate. So from 1980 to 1995, for 15 years, here was the ICC. They still had 600 employees going over thousands of pages of shipping rates and rules during this time. In fact, they were discussing whether candy canes should be charged at a different shipping rate than just plain candy. Then finally in 1996, so we're talking, 16 years later, they finally banned, or finally disbanded the agency altogether. It took 16 years to get rid of it. That's just one agency. And how many agencies we have? We have many. So let's go on to another problem. Another problem is the increasing inefficiency and waste. So when we talk about increasing waste, well, there's a lot of waste with bureaucracies. Oh my goodness. So we found the greater the size, the greater size of a bureaucracy, there was more waste and inefficiency. Americans were victims of costly delays. So if you're going through the paperwork for a bureaucracy, you'll find in your life all this paperwork when you come to the government, paperwork with different bureaucracies. And the paperwork would be like this avalanche of paperwork with no real assistance to it. So the Americans must deal with the federal bureaucracy, often find themselves the victims of costly delays created by lost paperwork and many mistakes, and it takes a long time. So when we think of this, when you think of it says here too, 2/3 of the money, it says, of the drug companies used for research goes to Food and Drug Administration guidelines. So whenever you're giving to an agency, look to where your money goes if you're giving to that. Because basically, maybe not even, I might say giving to the agency, but where the money goes, usually it goes, 2/3 goes just to the bureaucracy, just to pay the people working there, right? And so the businesses report losing important contracts because of confusing paperwork and unreasonable procedures, all these things. So recently, to cut down the paperwork, they tried to do this, but the business still was frustrated by inefficiency, bureaucracy, and waste of time and money. So people have looked at this and known this, but it hasn't got any better. So government inefficiency also is a drain on government resources. The federal government annually generates thousands of rules which demand compliance by the citizens and by businesses. So failure to comply to these rules results in fines, confiscation of property, taking your property away, or even imprisonment. So rules so numerous and complicated, and now we don't obey the rules, and the businesses must know what rules to obey. They have to hire lawyers. We have to hire lawyers to tell us what rules we have to obey in our businesses. It's crazy, crazy. So the cost of these demands is enormous burdens and strains, on a business. And it's very unbearable for most small businesses. Small businesses actually end up paying, it says here, $1.75 trillion a year. That's how many a year small businesses have to pay. So when you think about that, it has been estimated by 2010, the average household now will have to pay $15,000. And these businesses, of course, have to up their prices on their supplies to us because they have to pay all of these dollars a year for the bureaucracy, to hire lawyers to find out what rules they need to obey, right? So it's getting pretty crazy. So it says it is no coincidence that the productivity of the United States economy has declined on almost every proportion to the rapid buildup of government employment. So one agency that is really a problem now is the environmental, when you think of Environmental Protection Agency. So, here's a picture down here. It says, "Congratulations, you are now the proud owners of a wetland swarming with endangered species." They're trying to sell. So federal agencies like the EPA may regulate and restrict the property of private individuals as well as businesses and have even prevented some from building homes on their own land. You can own this land, but now you can't do anything with it, and nobody wants to buy it because it has a lot of endangered species. And so you're just going to be taking care of the endangered species on your land. That is crazy, but it happens, right? So the Environmental Protection Agency is a problem, so in this area. So the Environmental Protection Agency has cost Americans and businesses millions of dollars, trying to, we need to be zealous. We need to protect our environment. In the 1970s, that's not too long ago, the EPA forced these manufacturers to equip our automobiles, especially in California, with catalytic converters. The catalytic converter, the only purpose that a catalytic converter would have is to try to cut out air pollution. Well, there's a lot of automobiles, we know in California, and they thought, we need to be required that they have catalytic converters. So they later found something totally different than they thought, because then later the agency discovered they didn't want catalytic converters because actually the catalytic converters were emitting poisonous fumes that were worse than air pollution. So now, we still have to get our cars all with the catalytic converters and have them all inspected and made sure that they have them. But now they're emitting poisonous fumes that are worse. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, didn't have it right. And then in the 1980s, here's another one the EPA did, the asbestos. I know I've been involved in asbestos because of my husband, Papu, and he's basically in the building industry, and he had to go in and deal with a lot of asbestos in public buildings. And so the asbestos was considered a hazard, especially in the schools then, and they had to go back and remove asbestos from all of these different schools and buildings and such, and basically a certain way to remove this asbestos. But a 1990 study revealed what? It basically revealed that asbestos, in the buildings was relatively harmless, the type of asbestos that was there. But that it was actually way more harmful when you removed it. That way, all of these carpenters, all of these tradesmen working to remove this asbestos would be harmed. If they would have left the asbestos alone, it would have been harmless. So thanks down here, I like what they said, but this was said right here because it just says, this led one person to remark that the EPA's effort to remove asbestos from public buildings was a life-saving program that could kill you, designed to correct a largely non-existent problem by removing materials that aren't dangerous until somebody removes them. So what a joke was the asbestos, saying, asbestos is not harmful, while in the buildings itself. Now it would, in fact, but if you start removing them, then you're going to put the asbestos in the air, and then all is going to be terrible. And a lot of builders and those that have been in the trades to do this have had problems with their lungs and inhaling the asbestos that they were removing. So actually, down here, let's see. Oh, this is it. This is another one. It says, sometimes regulations are aimed at businesses to change the behavior of employees on the job. And so the Equal Opportunity EPA said, we don't want Christians, this is in 1993, we don't want Christians telling people about Jesus while they're working. Can you believe that? So they targeted Christians in 1993 when it sought to pass regulations against religious expression in the workplace. Although, we're not talking about the EPA now, we're talking the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I hope I didn't say EPA, but we're talking about equal employment opportunity. And so they went through to threaten Christians that they would take action if Christians attempted to present their Christianity at on the job. So you could imagine that. And so they actually used this as a weapon that threatened Christians. I mean, you sit next to someone, get out your Bible, or you can say, maybe you can talk afterwards. If you guys, would you like to know a little bit? When they ask you questions, you couldn't do anything. What they were doing is basically controlling a certain people. And what person would they be controlling? You and I, right? No one else had the rules against them. In fact, the other types of religions weren't even regulated, What about all the other religions in the world, What about witchcraft and all this stuff? That wasn't regulated. They just wanted to regulate Christians. Isn't that how the enemy goes? So it says as individual and corporate freedoms. That means our freedoms on our job and as individuals, our politics, our economic part of us, and our religious, political, economic, and religious cannot be separated. We can't just separate parts of us. They are intriguingly and immeasurably related. It says, by interfering with basic freedoms and discouraging initiative, government bureaucracies has generally hindered the productivity and prosperity and has threatened the endurance of American heritage. So these bureaucracies threatening our entire life. Going on to another problem. So we haven't got through these problems yet. So the third problem is deficit spending. So of course, there's a lot of inefficiency and waste that produce much spending, excess spending, called deficit spending. The government spends annually more than it receives in revenue, so we're in debt. Since President Kennedy in 1960, the country budget surplus was only 6 times. And now, well, just in 2011, it's $14 trillion. We're that much in debt. That's our federal debt. And the amount of interest on this federal debt is staggering. So you can imagine. So we are so much in debt. Here we have the budget dollar, and it says that where it comes from, from our taxes and this social and all the social and search payroll taxes and all these things, and where it goes. And now we are so much in debt. So, well, during the war for independence, many states did incur a large debt. We were in debt. Why? Because we were in debt because of the war, right? And so from that point, the Confederate Congress, under the Articles of the Confederation, that was before our Constitution, incurred more debt because they had no money coming in. So the problem was compounded by the inability of Congress to tax the states, because Congress did not tax the states. Where would they get money to pay their debt? So as a result, the national government was in danger of defaulting because it had no money coming in. So therefore, the Constitution was written. And the framers placed Article 6, a provision which said the government would honor all debts, basically all debts would be honored as they entered before. So basically, then they said all debts would be honored, that they were going to honor debts. And because the first Congress honored the commitment laid out in the Constitution, the new United States started with a large debt. And at the urging, like when you think of, I think of Alexander Hamilton, the federal government, through him, he basically said would assume all the debts of the states. So this would be about $20 per person to be able to pay back these debts. And this was in 1792. But each year it got better as the debt became less and less. And so by 1811, the debt was cut in half already. And President Andrew Jackson, the 7th president of the United States, basically brought our government to being debt-free. So he put the emphasis, here's a picture of him there. He completely retired the national debt. He said, we do not want our government to be in debt. So he paid off our debts. He said, free from public debt, at peace with all the world. So he said, the president may be hailed as an epoch in our history as the most favorable for the settlement of those principles in our domestic policy, which shall give stability to our republic and secure the blessings of freedom to our citizens. Basically, he said, in this way, we can give freedom to our citizens. You're free when you don't have debts, right? So Jackson believed that the borrower is servant to the lender. Where did he get that? My goodness, he got that from the Bible, didn't he? And he said our nation's freedom was directly tied to our nation's ability to be financially free. So President Jackson was so right. He said our national freedom is not secure as long as our national debt accumulates. Well, we are so in debt. We can't even pay the interest on our debt. So we're in debt to China and Japan, and this weakens our nation. And our national debt ties the hands of our national leaders and leaves them incapable of making any choices for our nation in the area of foreign policy. We can't even do a foreign policy when we owe them a ton of money, right? So, but basically we actually owe for the Federal Reserve. We owe money to certain private people. When you think of people that have lent our government money, we know, what about George Soros, what about Bill Gates, and what about these very extreme billionaires and on that have actually lent money to our government. And that point, the Federal Reserve, we don't know the Federal Reserve, who are these people that we're paying so high interest rates, that's where our money is going. And that is control, isn't it? It says no nation can break God's laws regarding finances and survive long. So if we break the laws of finances and do not pay back our money and borrow more and more money, I just was listening to, Kamala Harris or whatever, she was saying, we're going to give you each $6,000, for those, businesses, and we're also going to give each person this much money, and we're going to give each illegal alien, on and on and on, giving. Where do you think she's getting this money to give? For one thing, there's a borrowing of money, and for the other thing, she's going to get it from you, and basically taking the money from the citizen, giving where they want to give. So no nation can break God's law regarding finances and survive long. As a nation, we will reap economic ruin if we do not begin now to repay our repair our financial state. So this is important. It's so important that we do this. So let's go on. I think I could go over, I know this is going to be longer, but I think I could go over. But before I do this, I want to go over that story. Why don't we do, I'm going to go over the section. Let's go over section review. Just looking to see where I have the section review here. Maybe I don't have the section review. Oh, here it is. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I have it here so I can go over it quickly here. So, oh, here it is right in front of me. So, what is an ALJ? Why are ALJs sometimes called hidden judiciary? ALJ means administrative law judges, and they're a special group of this hidden judiciary part of agencies, regulatory agencies, and they make the important decisions and stuff, and they're known for their activities, as being judges who preside these informal little public cases that are in these agencies that are bringing forth our rules and regulations. So just think, why are the ALGs sometimes called hidden judiciaries? Because we don't hear about them, do we? Because they're in like a regulatory agency comes, to regulate things, right? And they have their own judicial system to say, to try, and if you're not, and to give the fines for not doing what you're supposed to be doing, what they think you're supposed to be doing. Number 2, how does the federal bureaucracy violate the separation of powers established in the Constitution? So concentrated powers, it concentrates the power of the executive department, that's carrying out the powers, the regulating, right? But also legislative, they make their own rules without Congress, and their own judicial power, they try their own cases to see if the rules are carried out. So concentrated powers are very detrimental. Number 3, what area of American life is threatened because of the expanding bureaucracy? So what area? Well, our freedom, of course, and especially our free enterprise system, our business system, our free enterprise system is at stake. So our American liberty, political, economic, and religious freedom are all at stake too. 4, who bears the most of the burden of the government regulations? So who bears the most burden? I would say the American citizen, but also American businesses in our free enterprise system. Number 5, how has the federal bureaucracy hindered the productivity and prosperity of American business and industry and threatened individual freedoms? Give examples. We've seen these freedoms right there. The freedoms of the EPA, environmental, basically saying, okay, and bringing forth their own laws and say, okay, now we have laws on climate control, now we have laws on this and this, bringing forth their own laws. And also, I gave the examples of asbestos and how that they were wrong at catalytic converters and asbestos and all these rules, and finding out, they weren't, they caused a big, huge problem where problems shouldn't exist. So, okay, so you can look at those examples. I kind of went over them before. So there's one more thing. And sit down and hold out here, because this is the last of this part. And it says the danger of the almighty bureaucracy. This danger of the almighty bureaucracy is a story that is pretty gross. So I'm not going to read it. You can read this, but it says basically it shows the growth of our government power over our American lives and property too. And this is the national concern, and the rights of the United States citizen are threatened by these administrating, domineering bureaucracies, right? So this story is in 1992 in the Idaho mountains on August 21st, 1992, in exact time. This shows the danger of unrestricted bureaucracy, and this came to the public's attention. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, guns, they dispatched a team of marshals to arrest a man named Randy Weaver at his home in Ruby Ridge, Idaho. His charge was he violated federal firearms regulation, gun control, or the gun regulation, and he failed to appear in court on a certain date that was prescribed. He just forgot to appear. So, but instead of looking at that he may have contacted him in any way, they sent out marshals. And these marshals were dressed in camouflage, and they were armed with machine guns. And they entered Randy Weaver's property from the woods, just snuck in from the woods. They didn't go to his door. They came in from the woods rather than the road. And they approached the family's cabin because they were spying on him for surveillance. And so the marshals then that were in the woods, they saw Randy Weaver's 14-year-old son named Sammy and a friend of the family named Kevin Harris. And they were armed with hunting rifles. They were out hunting. And they were following their dog in the woods hunting pheasants, hunting deer, but they were hunting. The dog started barking and discovered the agents in the woods. And so the men in the woods, the marshals, shot the dog. They shot the dog and killed the dog. And so the boy looked back and he thought, what are these guys dressed up here? What are they? Aliens or whatever? You can imagine what he thought. Who are they? And so he's shot back at the gunman, who was also shot. One of the marshals was shot. And so this gunfire exchange happened, and all that Sammy Weaver and Harris, as they shot back, Sammy, only 14 years old, was killed dead. He died. He was shot and killed. And so Harris ran and took cover in their cabin. And so the United States Marshal called in reinforcements. The next day, the FBI, for goodness sakes, the FBI massed assault on Ruby Ridge. Randy Weaver, they were in their cabin, was wounded. Instead of coming and talking to him, Randy Weaver was wounded. His wife came to the door with her baby in her arms, answering the door, and she was killed by an FBI sniper that shot her down when she came to the door just carrying her baby. Randy Weaver and Kevin Harris, they surrendered in 10 days, thinking, what is going on? They surrendered. The FBI came and arrested them and charged them with the death of a marshal that had been killed and a lot of different serious crimes, But they charged them with actually murder. But the Idaho jury acquitted Randy Weaver and Harris of all of the charges except that he had forgot to come to court. Can you believe that? And so, but the Weaver family later on was granted $3.1 million in a settlement for keeping quiet there and applying all these debts. Could you imagine, $3.1 million given, but of course he lost his son, Sammy, and his wife. So the congressional hearings found serious breaches of conduct in this, and the FBI agreed to reverse its rules of engagement and all these things. So the heart of this lies in asserting the right of individuals to be safe from abuse of power by the federal government. You and I, we could be invaded by the FBI because we forgot to pay our or go to our court appearance or something. Can you imagine? This was an ultimate nightmare for Americans, to find themselves under assault by the federal government that has tossed out the rules. The whole idea of the Constitution is to impose rules on the federal government to protect individuals from the ruthless use of government power. What a terrible, the danger of the almighty bureaucracy to come in and attack us. So let's think. Let's go and vote. I mean, if you're 18, you can vote, of course, or not. Ellie is, but anyway, we want to uphold, a federal government that wants to decrease bureaucracy, not increase bureaucracy.